My name is David Lenga. I was born on December the 3rd, 1927, in the city of Lodz, Poland. I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. When the war broke out in 1939 on September the 1st, I found myself on a streetcar traveling to deliver a package that my mother gave me to deliver to somebody that she owed a debt to. In the middle about our ride, 15 minutes into our ride, we were attacked brutally by German planes, attack planes, that swooped down on the civilian population and massacred the people without any regard to any convention or anything. And it was a mayhem. Blood was running on the street immediately. Body parts were flying. People were running for shelter, and so did I. That lasted for about a half an hour, and when the damage was done, the people were bewildered. I found my way home, back to my parents. My parents already knew from the radio that we were attacked, and my father wanted to know the particulars, what I experienced when I was in town. Immediately after that happened, my father brought us together and he said, I want you to understand that from here on, our life is hanging on a thread, in particular because we are Jews. Hitler is out to annihilate the Jewish people, and what is going to happen tomorrow, we don't know. But he said, whatever happens, we have to stay together for as long as we can and look for solace into each other. Like we have to look for solace for the Holocaust survivors who live in poverty. Several days after the war broke out, a jeep with 3 SS men with weapons drawn stopped in front of our house. They knocked on our door and we became petrified because we didn't know what is happening. My father opened the door. He was the one that spoke a very good German, by the way. And they said to him point blank, are you Abraham Lenga? And he said, yes. You come with us. And he says, why? I didn't do anything. Why do I need to go with you? Never mind. No questions asked. You leave everything as it is. You come with us. And they took him away. They took him to the Gestapo headquarters, which is this German secret police headquarters. And they interrogated him and they told him in no uncertain terms. We know, they said, that you are the owner of a tannery, of a factory in the city of Strykov, which is 18 kilometers south of the city of Lodz. And we want you to understand that from now on, you are no longer the owner. We are confiscating the factory. You're going to be working for the German Reich from here on. We will supply you with raw materials and you will produce for the German army leather and goods in your factory. And my father was stunned. He didn't know what to say. You couldn't say that I didn't agree with your decision because his life was hanging on a thread. So he said, can I take my wife and children with me? And they said, yes, you can do that. And so they let him go. He came home. He told my mother what happened. And he said, well, seems like we are forced to do what they tell us. And 3 days later, they came with a big truck. They loaded us up, and we weren't allowed to take anything with us except the clothes on our back. And they took us to the city of Strykov, small little town where we had a factory, and they assigned us a place where to live, a place that they evidently confiscated from someone else. And from that time on, 1940, we were living in the city of Strykov, and we were working every single day in the factory. And my father was told that the city's Jews were his labor pool. He needs more workers, then he will have to take it from the Jews that live in the city of Strykov. And he realized that if they are employed, they were not going to be deported and killed. So he prevailed by the Germans that he should have 50% more people than he actually needed in order to save them from being killed by the Germans. if they work, they're not going to be killed. And so that was one thing that my father did that I never forget. At any rate, we were working in Strykov. We went undergoing a ghetto there because they created a perimeter in the town where the Jews could live and couldn't go beyond that. We were relatively starving because the food that we were given as rations were totally inadequate. But this is the conditions we had to live with. And we lived in the city of Strykov and we worked there, my mother, my dad, myself, and my grandmother and my younger brother, which was 4 years younger than me. He was too young to work, so he had to stay home with my grandmother. And this was going on till 1942. In 1942, the Germans closed the ghetto in Strykov because the Allied armies kept coming ever closer towards Germany, and they wanted to just eliminate the little small towns. And what they did is select the people, put us on the Jewish cemetery, all of us Jews, and there we were staying 3 days and 3 nights waiting for something to happen. Eventually, after the third day, they came with big trucks, with dogs, and with weapons drawn on us, and they made selections who is able-bodied and who is not. And my father at that time was very, very sick. He had double pneumonia, and my mother didn't think that he'll ever survive the next day. But they took him along with other able-bodied men and selected him to be sent to a slave labor camp in Poznan. It was a big labor camp there, and we never thought that we were ever going to see him again. Me, my brother, and my mom, and my grandma, we were all sent to the city of Lodz, to the ghetto at that time. The ghetto in Lodz in 1942 was very established already. They had towers and barbed wire and electric wire and all the things that the Germans did to isolate the Jews in the ghetto. There we were assigned work and a place where to live. 2 families usually in a little apartment. The hunger in the ghetto was incredibly great. It was by design. And in 1942, late in fall, they made one of the biggest raids ever on the Jews in the ghetto. And the raids were designed to sift through the population, those that they considered able-bodied, remained in the ghetto to work, go on working, and those that they considered not able-bodied, like older people, sick people, small children, or anyone that they considered not worthy or being able-bodied, they would separate and send to die in the Chelmno, in the city of Chelmno. They had an extermination camp there. When the selection came, we were all lined up in front of our homes, and I could see that when our turn came from our district to be selected, the people in front of me were going left and right, not knowing what that meant. And my mother was selected to go back in the ghetto to work as an able-bodied woman. And at that time, in 1942, my mother was only 41 years old. Of course, she was able-bodied. But I and my brother, we were selected with the other people to be exterminated, to be killed. And we were taken to a holding place, but I saw with my own eyes that my mother was in front of me and she was actually told to go back to the ghetto to work. So that means she was supposed to be alive. Anyway, we were separated and we were taken to a holding area, huge warehouse, and we did not know what is waiting for us. We were bewildered, we were hungry, we were despaired. But I and my brother, we were sitting there in that warehouse along with all the other people, not knowing what's going on around us. What happened that we didn't know at the time was when my mother realized that she was sent to the ghetto and her children were taken away, she told her older sister that also lived in the ghetto that she does not want to go on living. Her life doesn't have any meaning anymore. Her husband was taken away. Now her children were taken away. Nobody to live for. And so she wants to go where her children are. So my mother went to see her brother-in-law, my father's oldest brother, because he was the supervisor of the largest clothing factory in the ghetto, the Loja ghetto, and she was trying to prevail on him to pull the strings or whatever power he has to free her children. And he couldn't guarantee that to her because he was powerless himself. That's the way he felt. And she left him disheartened and desperate and in tremendous pain, and went back to the ghetto and told her sister that she's going to report back to the SS to be with her children. She does not want to live this way. So she went back indeed, and she told the SS that whatever, they took her children away, wherever her children are, that's where she wants to be. Whatever happens to them is going to happen to her. She wants to be with her children. And they were more than happy to take her. And they took her and they killed her along with my brother. So all of a sudden, I hear my name being called, David Lenga, report to the front door. So I said to my brother, did I hear my name? And he says, yes. I says, look, Nathan, his name was Nathan. I says, Nathan, you sit right here. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming right back. I just wanted to know what they want. So I come to the front door, and this burly, very menacing looking man stood there, and he says to me, are you David Lenga? I said, yes. So he opens the door, I crack, and he tells me to go run out back to the ghetto and run and don't look back. Just run for your life. And I says, well, what about my brother? And he says, never mind your brother. We'll take care of him. And so I ran back to the ghetto alone. And the first thing I tried to look for is my mom, because I saw that she was free to go back to the ghetto. I couldn't find her. So her sister was there, her older sister. And I says, Aunt Bina, I says, what happened to Mom? Where is Mom? Why isn't Mom here? She knew, but she wouldn't tell me right away. And so she says, well, Dave, calm down, because she probably went to look for you and your brother. I said, went to look for me? So I sat and I waited hour after hour, and I waited, and I started realizing something isn't right because my mother didn't show up. So eventually I told my aunt, I said, you got to level with me because I don't think that you're telling me the truth. I mean, what happened to Mom? Why isn't she here? And that is when she came down, she broke down, she told me the truth. Your mom went to be with you because she did not want to live without your children. And so they took her away. And so then I realized that I lost my mom. And I was 14 years old at that time. I was a total orphan. I had no father, no brother, no mother, no one in my life except my aunt that was there in the ghetto. I became terribly, not only saddened, but hurt, and I became suicidal, is what I became. And I had nothing to live for anymore, because there was nobody to live for. At 14 years of age. Hell, and Lodge was a hell of a ghetto anyway. Life every day was hell, living hell. And I didn't want to live that way. So one day, shortly thereafter, I went up on a third store abandoned building close to where I lived, and I opened the window and I wanted to throw myself down and kill myself because there was nothing to live for. And as I was trying to open that window, somebody pulled me back by the scruff of my neck and pulled me back and says, no, you're not going to do this. I'm not going to let you. That was my aunt. She realized I'm suicidal. She just was after me like an eagle. She knew something bad. I may do something bad, so she was after me. And she didn't let me, she prevented me from jumping. And she says, you're going to live with me and my son, which was my cousin, and the three of us, we will do the best we can every day, and we will hope that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday. But I'm not going to let you do what you want to do. You are not going to take your life. And as time went by, I realized that I could not change anything, and I had to report to work whether I liked it or not, because if you don't work in the ghetto, you don't eat. They don't give you rations, coupons. And so life went on. And there was poverty, there was hunger, there was emaciated bodies, there were children and adults lying on the streets, dying. Nobody paid any heed because everybody was next in line. And so all you worried about is how to survive every hour, every day. And this is how I went on living. And one day, the desperation was so great, I was trying to look for ways of how to get some extra food. Had no idea. So I heard through the grapevine, people were talking that outside the ghetto, there are huge fields that the Polish farmers are farming there. They have potatoes, they have beets, they have all kinds of tomatoes, all kinds of things that they're growing, vegetables. And we only could get our hands on any of that, we could get some nourishment into our bodies. I was so taken by this idea. So in the middle of the night, I didn't tell anybody anything, not my aunt or her son. In the middle of the night, I secured a burlap sack from one of the abandoned buildings. And at the middle of the night, I was sneaking through doorways, hallways, fences, sideways, little alleys, wherever I could find my way to the end of the ghetto. And I did. It was the middle of the night. And there was this in front of me. First, I was confronted by towers above me guarding the ghetto. Second, there was a chicken fence surrounding the ghetto. And the fields were right there outside the chicken fence. But how do I get there? So, because it was dark and I was little, I was 14 years old, I took advantage of the situation and I started digging with my very hands the soft ground underneath the fence. And I dug enough of a hole after a while that I could slip into to be able to grab the potatoes and put it in my burlap sack. And I was on the other side already. I tore my clothing in the process, but I was on the other side where the vegetables were, and I was having half a sack of potatoes already filled, ready to go back, when all of a sudden a reflector from above came shone upon me. And I said, oh my God, now this is the end of me. And I was scared to death. And before I knew what was happening, I see a German soldier, an older German soldier, training his gun on me. And he says to me in German, verflucht nochmal, was machst du denn hier? God damn it, what are you doing here? And I start pleading with him. I start pleading for my life, actually. I said, sir, I realized he was an older man. I said, sir, my mom is dying of starvation. We're all so emaciated. All I want is just a potato to sustain ourselves. Wouldn't you please just let me have this potato and I will never show up here again? And I said to him, sir, maybe you have a grandson that is my age. Can't you just see it in your heart to let me go? And I was pleading with him that way. I was just so petrified. And to my astonishment, to my total astonishment, he lowers his rifle, he turns off the reflector, and he says to me, now take your goddamn sack, in German he said, take your goddamn sack with the potatoes and get the hell out of here. And I don't ever want to see you again. And if I do, I'll shoot you on the spot. Now I could not believe it. I could not believe this is happening. So I was frightened to death and I pulled that potato sack with me underneath the side of the fence and went back into the ghetto and ran for my life. He let me go. I don't understand it. He must have had it in his heart. Maybe he did have a grandson like me. I don't know. But he just, for some reason, let me go. Something I never forget. Now I have a different problem. I'm in the middle of the night with half a sack of potatoes trying to get back home. It was a long stretch. But I didn't dare to be seen by anyone. Because anyone in the ghetto, Jew, I don't get all Jews, anyone seeing me with food, with potatoes, they would totally tear me apart and take my food away because everybody was starved. So now I have enemies, not only the Germans, but I had potential enemies by the people living in the ghetto because they're all starving. They all want a piece of the food. Okay, so I found my way back to my home with the burlap sack of potatoes. And during the night, my aunt happened to go down from her bed and she realized I'm not in the house and she became despondent. She didn't know what happened to me and she couldn't figure it out. And when I knocked on the door finally and I said, Aunt, open up, this is me, David, open up. And she flung open the door, pulled me in, and here I have a sack of potatoes. And I had to tell her what happened and she could not believe it. We were saved by my heroic feat. We were saved because we were able to eat for a month from the potatoes that we had, all three of us. This is just one incident. Anyway, I prevailed in the ghetto. I worked every day. I was working in the clothing factory creating clothing for the German army, for the German civilian population. My uncle took me under his wings because he was the supervisor, and he taught me all I need to know to become a tailor, which I really did. I acquired a trade at that point. And when in 1944 the Russian army came closer to Poland and started threatening the Germans, they panicked and they decided to close the ghetto in Lodz and eliminate it completely, and then take all the residents, the Jews, and resettle them, what they call resettle them to Germany proper in labor camps. And everybody had to report to the German command at a certain time that was announced, where every district had to report to the substation to be taken with cattle cars to the Germany proper. That's what they told us. When my turn came, and the district where I lived, when our turn came to report, to be deported, I told my aunt that I'm not going. She and her son decided that they will go, because if we don't go and they catch you, that you're still remaining, they shoot you on the spot. This was no doubt about it. They made no bones about it. But I refused to go. And she says, well, you can't remain alone in the ghetto. I says, maybe I can and maybe I can't, but I could hear in the distance the cannons, the Russian cannons. The front was so close to where we lived that I could hear the cannons in the distance. I said, if they're that close, if I prevail and I hide myself in the ghetto, at least for a few days, I may be liberated. And I don't have to go, what the Germans tell me to go back to Germany. And she says, but this is unlikely. She says, in the meantime, you have to live. I says, I'll do the best I can. I'll have to take a chance. They left, the ghetto was evacuated, and I remained alone in the ghetto. This is the way it seemed to me, like alone, because everywhere around me, everything was abandoned, all the buildings. People left. Now I had to sustain myself. And I had to scavenge for food at night, because in the daytime I didn't dare to be seen. So I had to scavenge for food, and I had to sustain myself the best I knew how. And then one day I was cooking a potato that I found in an abandoned building, and we didn't have electric stoves and we didn't have gas stoves. We had to have wood stoves. In order to cook anything, you had to have kindling and burn wood to cook something. And I did, as I was accustomed to. But what I didn't realize is that smoke from that wood would show up in the chimney, and they realized that there is a Jew in one of those buildings, because the wood, they could see the smoke coming out. So all of a sudden I hear dogs barking and Germans screaming, "There's a Jude, there's a Jude, there's a Jude, there's a Jude, let's go and get him." And when I realized what is happening, I ran to the third-story building. It was a building close to where I lived that I created for myself, a little cubby hole, and the roof. There was a pitched roof with the rafters, and the rafters were covered with planks. And I pulled one of those planks away to, there's a hole where I could hide in case I'm discovered. I thought ahead of time a few days ago, and I found this place, hiding place, and I hid myself there. And they came with their dogs, and they came ever closer, and I could hear, and my heart was pounding. I couldn't breathe, and I was sitting there petrified. What is happening next? I thought, this is the end of me. And as they were entering the second floor, a miracle happened, and the big sirens of the city started blaring, because evidently they were fearing an attack. And this was in the middle of the war. And when the sirens are blaring, the German army had sending orders that they had to drop everything what they're doing and run for shelter. And so they had to leave the building with their dogs running for shelter. And when they left, it saved me. I couldn't believe it. I was there in that cubby hole for the entire day, and deep into the night I didn't dare to go out because I didn't know if there was a trap or they're waiting for me to show up or what. And when after many hours I realized nobody, no sound, no dogs, so I ventured out and I came back to my place. And when I came back to my place where I lived, I became very despondent because I realized that too many days have passed by. The Russians are not liberating me. The sound of the cannons abated. I didn't know what was happening around me, and I didn't have any means of sustaining myself anymore. And so I became despondent, but I didn't dare to show my face because I'm going to be shot if I do. So one day I look out the kitchen window crack and I see an incredible sight in front of me. And the men in front of the sidewalk walking dressed in white and they're brooming the sidewalk with brooms. I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. So I was despondent. I had to communicate with somebody. So I ventured out and I pulled this last guy passing by his coat and I said, "Who are you? What are you doing here? What is this?" And he says, "We're the White Guard." And I says, "What do you mean you're the White Guard? What's the White Guard?" He says, "We are the contingent of Jews that the Germans left, selected to clean up the ghetto and broom it up so that whoever comes next should not see the mayhem that they created." "Oh my God," I said. I said, "So what happens afterwards, after you clean up the ghetto?" He says, "Well, then we are going to be transported like all the others to Germany proper." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "You give me a broom, I'll do what you were doing, and I'll be part of you." They gave me a broom, and I started brooming the sidewalk like they did, and I became part of the gang. And in the evening, when the work was done, they took us with trucks to a central station, to a special place where they gave us some soup. It was the first soup I had for days. And after a while, when we finished sweeping up together, they got us together, put us in cattle cars, and supposedly took us to Germany. But when the cattle cars stopped, after many days, many nights of travel, hungry, thirsty, we had to give no food or water, we had no toilet at all, we were despondent when we arrived finally where we did, and then when the doors were flung open and I see all these Germans with dogs and machine guns standing in front of us on the tarmac, and also a whole bunch of what seemed to be prisoners in striped clothing, trying to get all these people together in rows and get them, to be taken away. And I didn't look I didn't know where I was. So I came down to the tarmac and I said to one of those striped prisoners, I says, "Where am I? What kind of a place is this? I thought it was in Germany." He says, "No, you're in Auschwitz." And I says, "What is Auschwitz?" He says, "Never mind, you'll find out." I says, "Well, what kind of a place is this?" He says, "Turn around." So I turned around. He says, "See that big chimney with all this black smoke coming out from it in the back of you?" I says, "Yeah, what about it?" He says, "That's where you wind up." I was stunned. I said, "What do you mean that's where I wind up? Why would I wind up there?" He said, "That's where you wind up, never mind. You'll find out." And so before I knew what was happening, they rounded up the people, they put them on trucks, and they took them to the camp proper. When we came to camp in Auschwitz, we were assigned bunkers where to live. And then we were told that we will be given orders where to work in gangs. They assigned every day. They assigned a gang of prisoners to work with certain things. And while I was there, I heard the sirens wailing day and night, day and night. I wasn't accustomed. I didn't know what it was. So I said to the people that were there before me, "Why is this sirens day and night? What's going on? It's like ambulances or fire trucks. What is going on?" And they says, "Well, it's a continuous raid on the camp." I says, "What does that mean?" He says, "That means that they are sifting through constantly the population, because new arrivals keep coming, and they're sifting through those that are able to work, they remain in the camp, and those that they consider unable to work, but unproductive, they're taken away, they're burning them in the crematorium, but the chimney that I just saw coming out, that black smoke. And I said, oh my God, so I thought to myself, well, who in the hell is to know? Maybe I'm next. I mean, I don't know, my life was hanging on a thread. I didn't want to be there. So the third day after being there, I go outside. So I see this line forming with men. I get to the last one in line and I says, what is this line for? What are you doing here? He says, we're being selected to work in Germany proper, but they are looking for special craftsmen. I said, what kind of craftsmen? They're looking for welders, for builders, for mechanics, for engineers. And I was none of those. I was a tailor. They didn't need me. But I wanted to get out of Auschwitz so bad. I would deploy every means, every cunning. So I said to myself, what the hell? Everybody looks like everybody else. We were all striped clothing. We were all deloused. We were all shaved, bare. Everybody. If I had my brother next to me, I wouldn't recognize him. Everybody looked the same. So I figured they're all standing in line to be taken to Germany to work. So I stayed in line too. I took a chance. When my turn came, I saw all these people who were older than me in front. Oh, I'm a mechanic, I'm a carpenter, I'm a welder, I'm an engineer. You know, everybody was somebody that they could use. When it came my turn, I couldn't say I'm a tailor because I knew they didn't need me. So I says, I'm a carpenter. So the assessment in front of me, I didn't realize who it was. I found out later it was Dr. Mengele, that infamous doctor. He looked at me and he says, you are what? He said, you are a carpenter? Come on, you got your mother's milk on your mouth yet. He said, I was a kid, I was 15 years old. He says, get out of here. And so he throws me back out and back to the ghetto. But I realized that this is my chance to escape Auschwitz after 3 days. So I go back in line and I figured the same thing, that everybody looks like everybody else. He probably won't recognize me, hundreds of people. And one after one, they're passing him and he makes selections left and right. And when my turn comes, he recognizes me. He recognized me. He said, didn't I see you before? I says, no, sir. I said, I'm a carpenter. I says, get out of here. You're not a carpenter. If I see you one more time, I'll shoot you on the spot. At that time, I knew no way in hell that I can risk another chance to be recognized because he will actually shoot me. And so now I was despondent. And I was milling around. And the people were selected and they were taken to a special area that was fenced around. And I see two burly guys coming from the kitchen with a big pole. One has the one end of the pole on one shoulder and the other one on the back has the other end of the pole on the other shoulder. And in the middle there's a big bucket of soup. And I go up to them and I said, what are you doing? What is this? Where are you going? He says, we're taking it to the kitchen. This is soup. He says, for the people that were selected. Oh my God, I figured like a flash, like this is my chance. So I go right under that pole, right in front of the last guy, and I says, we are going to be 3 of us taking the soup to the area. I says, no, you cannot do this. They know that we're only 2. You're making us trouble. I says, you're making trouble when you make it fast, because then you draw attention to us and we're all going to be in trouble. So just keep quiet, let me walk. So they were gritting their teeth. They couldn't do anything about it. They were intimidated. And we walked into the holding area and they put down the bucket of soup. And the minute they did that, I disappeared among those that were selected, among the crowd. I just disappeared. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to be heard. I was scared to death. I didn't want to be discovered. The soup was delivered. They left. The gates were closed. And after several hours, the trains came and they started bringing the people into the trains, shoving them into the trains to be taken to Germany, actually. Slave labor camps. When I saw the trains coming, I said to myself, I got to be the first one on that train. Not the last one, not the second one, the very first one. I wouldn't take any chances to be left behind. And so I was the first one. And when everybody was counted, the Germans are very meticulous, they knew exactly how many people were supposed to be there. When they were counting 200 people, and one was left, and that one that was left, I took his place, evidently. And I could hear him screaming and yelling. But I was selected. But I was selected. Why weren't you not taking me? I was selected. Didn't help. He was one too many. They let him go. And I was taken away along with the others to Germany. And it was a cattle car, no roofs. We were traveling many days and nights. When we finally arrived, after many, many days, hungry and thirsty and miserable and stinking and dirty, when the doors flung open, we were at a so-called tarmac in the middle of nowhere, where the Germans created a cluster of slave labor camps. One section for women and one section for men. The place where they took us was called Kaufering. It was a small town not far from Munich, in southern Germany, in Bavaria. There we were assigned barracks, we were assigned where to work and where to live, and we stayed there in that camp, in Kaufering camp, for like a year, and it became horrendously terrible. We were being worked to our death. Many people died. It became an epidemic camp because people got sick, and the sicknesses spread, and it was typhoid fever and dysentery and everything. I was sick too, and I barely survived. I don't know how, but anyway, in that camp we were working until about 1944, the end of 44, and at that point, the Germans and the Allies were closing in on Germany, and they really invaded Germany already. We didn't know anything about it, but later it became apparent to us what happened. And so the Germans panicked, and they closed off all the, eliminated the camps again, and took all the survivors to trains, again cattle cars, and tried to ferry them from the south of Germany, where we were, to the north, to Bergen-Belsen, another infamous concentration camp. That is going from the south to the north of Germany. So they took us, after a certain march to these trains. They loaded us up. We had a lot of guards all around us, and the train kept on moving, and kept on moving for about an hour. And then after about an hour, it stopped in a very thick forest, and didn't go forth, didn't go back, just stopped there. And we didn't know what was happening. And in the meantime, after about a half an hour or so of waiting, another train, this time a military train, comes from the other side and also stops. What was happening is that the Allies were bombarding the tracks and the bridges in the front and in the back. We didn't know, so they were stuck, those trains. And as we were waiting, cold, shivering, with little tiny thin blankets that we were able to take with us, and that's all. And it was the beginning of spring, and in Germany it was cold at that time, it was rainy. And while we were waiting and not knowing what's next, all of a sudden we see an armada coming from the horizon of jet planes. This is the first time in my life I saw a jet plane. Everything till now that I saw was with propeller driven, but this was jet planes coming towards our train, swooping down real low and machine gunning both trains, machine gunning them. And they came in waves, and so many of our people in those trains with open roofs, they died. Body parts were flying. It was a river of blood all of a sudden, and we knew that with every wave that they're coming, other victims are going to be there. And I said to my friends, my two friends that survived with me, I said, let's jump over the roof, because there was no roof. Let's jump over into the forest, save our lives. They're going to kill us here. And so we start jumping, and I was one of them that also was jumping. And we jumped over, and the Germans were yelling at us, if you keep on jumping, we'll shoot you. And I said to my friend, do I care how I die? If I die from a German bullet, or if I die from the air, with the Allies killing me? Let's save our lives. So we jumped into the forest. Many did. Of course, the Germans all did. because they saved themselves, but the locomotives were on fire. Now what happened was that evidently from the air, the pilots saw all these striped prisoners jumping. They realized that one of the trains is not military. It's full of prisoners, and only one was the military train. And so, but the damage was already done by the time they realized. They left us after some time, but a tremendous slaughterhouse happened there. And here we found ourselves in the forest surrounded by Germans, and they kept on yelling at us that we have to stay together and not move until we're told. So we stayed together in groups, and we were waiting what's next. And we stayed there for 3 nights and 3 days in the rain. And that night it was raining. We were soaked, we were cold, we were shivering, we were sick. But we were guarded by Germans. And the 3rd day, we wake up in the morning, and I hear the elder was among us saying to us, "Hey guys, there are no Germans anymore." And we were incredulous. What do you mean there are no Germans? What were just so many of them the night before? No, there are no Germans, none to be seen. We start looking actually for them, there was nobody to be seen. What was happening was that they knew that the war is coming to an end. So they deserted, they shed their military clothing that and left it in the train, and they prepared civilian clothing for themselves to put on and disappear among the population, and left us alone in the forest. So they left, and we were alone. And the first thing that the elder ones among us said that let's rob the military train, because there's a lot of food there probably. And sure enough there was. There were many cans, aluminum cans with all kinds of pork and beans and everything that the military was eating. But for us that were so emaciated, for us that were so hungry, for us this food was poison. We wasn't allowed to eat that stuff. At that point, nobody realized it because we were so hungry. All we wanted to do is just get some food in our body. Many people were using every stick and stone what they had, because there were no tools, there was no can openers, nothing to open these cans, and they broke them open somehow and started to manage and fill themselves with that food. And sure enough, they died after a few days. But I also was one of those that had this cans taken, because I also wanted some food. And my friends, but I couldn't open it. So I said to my friends, you know what, let's take it with us. And another opportunity later on, when we have a chance, we'll open it up. And we didn't, and that saved our lives. So anyway, after a while, we realized that we're alone. So the elder ones among us was saying to us, we cannot stay in the forest any longer. Nobody's supervising us. We don't know what to do, where to go, whom to talk to. So let's form little groups. 2, 3, 4 little gangs, and let's head out in the countryside till we meet somebody that we can ask what to do next. So I and my friend, my 2 friends and myself, we headed out on the meadows, on the countryside, just towards wherever it takes us to be able to see civilization, somebody to talk to. And so as we are heading out, about a half an hour of walking, I noticed in the horizon an outline that looked like a roof, like a hut of a roof of a hut or something like that. I says, there's a house there in the distance. Can you see it? Let's walk towards that house. Let's see what's happening. So we are walking towards that house, and as close as we came, we realized that this whole area was swarming with German soldiers. Oh my God, I said to my friends, we got into a hornet's nest here. I mean, this is not something I expected. But the forward patrols saw us, these 3 individuals, and they stopped yelling at us, halt, bleib stehen, stop, don't go any further. And so they come closer and they says, who are you and what are you doing here? And I kept telling them, we were abandoned by the German army. We were alone in the forest, and we didn't know what to do, so we just walking towards anyone, tell us what to do next. He says, well, you can't stay here, this is a military area. I says, okay, what do you want us to do? He says, I'll take it to my commander. So he takes me and my 2 friends to his commander into the house where he was. And we come in, the door opens up, and there I see on an overstuffed chair the fattest German I've ever seen, with the medals all over. He must have been like a general or something. And he was just very stern looking at us three boys, just wet and hungry and miserable. And he looks at us and he says, "Wer von euch spricht Deutsch? Who among you speaks German?" So I raised my hand because I spoke German very well. So he says, "Was machst du denn hier? What are you doing here?" I told him exactly what I told the other ones. And he says, "You cannot stay here because das ist ein militärisches Gebiet. This is a military area. You have to leave, not now." So I said, "Okay." He says, "Well, where do you suggest we go?" He says, "Go back where you came from." So I said to my friend, "You know what? There is no other choice. Let's just go back." So we start going back. And about 10 minutes into our walk, I hear a civilian person, an older man's voice screaming, "Halt, halt, geht nicht weiter. Stop, stop, don't go any further." And he runs towards us. And as he came closer, he had identified himself, who he was. He was the owner of the farm. He was the farmer of that huge farm. He says, "Listen, boys," he says, he spoke to in German, but I understood every word he said. So he said, "The military is leaving momentarily. They're not staying here. This is just a momentary stop here. When they leave, I want you to come with me right now. And I'll take you in a roundabout way to my farm, to a barn where you can stay and wait out. When they leave, I'll take care of you." Nobody talked to us this way so nicely. So I didn't know what happened. So I went with him, my friend and I. He took us to a barn and he put us down in the hay and he says, "You wait." After a few minutes, the Germans did leave, indeed. All of them. They all left. And he came back. He took us to a different barn. He had several of them. And that barn was nice. There was no animals or anything. It was nice and a lot of hay. We made ourselves comfortable. And he says, "My wife and I will return shortly. You just make yourself comfortable." So we were bewildered. We didn't know what is going on. After about maybe a half an hour, he comes back with his wife, and she has a huge tray of freshly baked donuts with jelly, sprinkled with powdered sugar, a big pitcher of hot milk, and we haven't seen that food for 6 years. And she says to us, "You boys must be starving." What an understatement that was. Starving. We were indeed starving. And so we gulped it down. We were grateful for everything that we got. And she says, "You're going to stay here. The war," she was the first one to tell us, "the war is coming to an end." That's what she told us. The war is coming to an end. And you stay here until everything calms down. And so we stayed on the farm for about 3 days. We were told that we cannot go into the main farmhouse, but there were outhouses for us to alleviate ourselves. There were outside showers that she gave us. She brought us some underwear, some new clothing, to put on. And all of a sudden, the three of us became human beings again. I mean, like, we couldn't believe it. And after the third day, I was in the outhouse, and my two friends were frolicking outside. And then I hear a tremendous rumbling. Heavy equipment, tanks like. Didn't know what is going on. And all of a sudden I hear my friends yelling at me, Dave, come out. We are free, we are free, we are liberated." And I couldn't process it, I couldn't understand it. So I run out and I see humongous amount of troops, black people. Up till that time I didn't know I saw a black person in my life. Because in Poland and Europe we didn't see black people. The only black people I knew was from the school books with rings in their noses in Africa. That's the only one I knew. But this was a new sight, and they all occupied the area in jeeps, in heavy tanks, in half-tracks, whatever. And they all surrounded the area, and they started to communicate with us. I ran out, and they said, they started talking to us. I didn't understand English at that time. None of us did. And so I spoke 3 languages, but not English. And so I realized how desperate they were to communicate with me. I was trying to do the same with them. And I said to them, I said, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Do you speak German?" No, English. "Rozmawiasz po polsku? Do you speak Polish?" No, just English. "Rest Yiddish?" No, Yiddish, just English. So now I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do. And while this is going on, amidst that formation appears a slanky, tall, white lieutenant, or he must have been an officer of some sort. He had a lot of medals on him. And he comes straight towards us. And he comes towards me and my friends, and he looks at us and he says, in total unadulterated Yiddish, he says, "Ihr Jünger, ihr sind Jiden. You boys, are you Jewish?" In Yiddish he said that to me. And I was like freaking out. I says, "Oh my God," I says, "he speaks Yiddish." I says, "Wait a minute," I says, "you're an American officer." I said, "How come you speak Yiddish?" And he says to me, "I'm from Brooklyn." I didn't know where the hell Brooklyn was at that time. It could have been Madagascar. I had no idea. But that's what he told me. And he says, "Look, boys," he says to me, and he spoke Yiddish to us. This is how we communicated. He says, "The war is at an end. We occupied Germany. Germany capitulated. You're coming with me. You're not staying at this farm anymore. I'll take you to an American transit camp for freed prisoners. You're going to be taken care of by the American administration, and you will have no other worries other than take care of yourself." He took us with him in his jeep, and he took us to Landsberg, the city of Landsberg. There was a big camp that the Americans have established. It used to be German barracks, I guess, at one point, but they made it into a transit camp for freed prisoners. This is how I was liberated. And subsequently, I was looking for survivors, for anyone that I knew, for anyone. I was going from camp to camp that was liberated, looking lists, because the tendency used to be at that time that wherever you came to a place looking for somebody and you couldn't find anyone, even if you did find someone, you left your name on a list so that the people coming after you could look at those lists and maybe find somebody there that they knew. And so many lists were created in those freed camps. And I was going from camp to camp looking for somebody that I knew, and I couldn't find nobody that I knew, nobody that is related in any way or even an acquaintance. I was very disheartened. And as this was going on, I could hear on the radio that they were announcing that Sweden has announced that they will take in 200,000 freed prisoners from concentration camp for rehabilitation. And sure enough, very many hundreds of thousands came to Sweden. And when I heard that, I said to my friend, "You know what? We cannot find anybody here that survived here in Germany. So let's go to Sweden, because I bet you Sweden, maybe we can find somebody." And so we actually went to the Swedish Red Cross in Hamburg. We enlisted, and we told them that we were freed prisoners, and we were processed. And with the Swedish Red Cross, we came to Sweden. That's how I wound up in Sweden. Now, Sweden never had a war. Sweden was neutral during the war, so-called neutral, but not a brick was touched there. Everything was very normal. It was very big difference from the rest of Europe that was laying in ashes. Okay, so I came with the Swedish Red Cross to Sweden. Sweden was a peaceful country. The Swedish people at that time, the Swedish government, took great care to take care of us. And in Sweden, I found my wife, my future wife. And when the war ended, I was close to 18 years of age. My wife also came to Sweden. She was a Holocaust survivor from Czechoslovakia. We met, we loved each other, we liked each other a lot. And after 3 weeks, I proposed to her, and we got married. And we lived in Sweden for 10 years. I worked there. I went to school there. I was able to progress in my knowledge of my own profession and become a designer. I was able to establish myself. I had 2 children, my wife and I, 2 girls that were born in Sweden. And after 10 years in Sweden, Europe started getting the political shivers because the Korean War started out, and everybody was afraid that a third world war is in the making, and we were all, especially the freed prisoners, from Germany, they were very much afraid to be caught in the vice again between Russia and the United States. And so we were looking for ways to leave Europe in a hurry. And I did everything I could to get the American visa. And we left Sweden after 10 years and came to the United States. And in the United States, we came to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at first. And I had some friends there that also lived in Sweden but came to America a little bit before me. And that's the reason I chose Pittsburgh. We settled down there. I was working there. I was providing for the family. We had a pretty good life. And in Sweden, in Pittsburgh rather, my children went to school. I made many friends. And we were thriving in a sense. But the fact that so many of our survivors have not been able to come out from this Holocaust whole. They were tremendously burdened. They were tremendously affected. They were mentally unstable. They couldn't establish good relationships with their own families or with their own children. They became bitter. They became isolated. They did not feel that life was worth living. And it was a trauma that they could not overcome. And I saw it all around me. But I was very fortunate, my wife and I, that we were able to overcome those difficulties. And I was able to go on with life, hoping for a better tomorrow for myself and for my family. And I have been able to create that better tomorrow by being industrious, by working hard, by getting involved in my profession on a higher level. I was working for the movie industry for 15 years. I was creating beautiful wardrobes for the movie industry. I got to know everyone who was who in the movie industry, actors, producers, directors, people of note. We were associated in Beverly Hills with a big firm called Eric Ross and Company, and through them I was very instrumental in making the company grow and prosper and become very well known, and I was able to establish a good life for myself. So I was able to make a good existence and a good life for myself, but unfortunately very, very many of my co-survivors that have not been as fortunate, that have immigrated to Israel and are now in their older years and live in great poverty, and they need assistance in the worst way. Those are the people that my heart goes out to, and I feel that all of us Jewish people, the entire Jewish community, owe it to the memory of the Holocaust, to the victims that went through horror in their lives, that are now suffering in poverty and misery and in loneliness, that we owe them a debt of gratitude for what they went through, and make sure that their lives in their old age is going to have meaning and dignity, and they will not be subjected to neglect and to indifference, because they don't deserve that. They deserve a good, decent age. When they pass away from this world, they should pass away in dignity and feeling that the community around them really does care what happens to them.